it's Lee from coloringqueen.net, and today I thought I would colour in for my Grace Ember colour along in Emma's Tales, the colouring notebook from Grazia Salvo, and she created this for Inktober. I'll put a link up where you can see a review of it that I did earlier in the week. And my apologies, it is blowing a gale outside, so I hope you don't hear too much noise in the background. But anyway, I've gone through and I've picked out the picture that sort of sums up my last couple of weeks, and Grazia drew this picture for the disgusting prompt for Inktober, but to me, this girl looks like she's in pain and she's got a toothache, and that's just me. So I'm putting that one down as toothache rather than pain or disgusting, as Grazia has done. And I'm going to colour it with my Prismas, and probably going to go a darker gothic route with this one because I'm feeling in that sort of mood. So we'll see how it goes. The Prism colours are going on really well. So Christmas has been and gone here in Australia, and I hope you enjoyed your holidays if you celebrate Christmas or whatever you might do over the holiday period. We did a lot of shopping the day before, not as much as we had planned to because David's family cancelled their trip, but we went out grocery shopping, and I'd put all of the things down on the floor, whatnot, as I was sorting them out to put away in our fridge upstairs and our fridge downstairs because it was just completely loaded. And anyway, we realised that we'd left a few things and we'd forgotten to buy some things, so I left it there, having already put the frozen stuff away, and we went up to the shops just for 15 minutes, came back. Buddy had found a whole plastic bag full of pita bread or Lebanese bread, whatever you like to call it. And by the time we'd come back, in 15 minutes, he'd eaten 5 pieces of pita bread. He'd opened up the plastic bag, and he'd only left 1 piece, which we had to throw out, obviously. He was very pleased with himself. So I was tempted not to give him his Christmas present, but he looked up at me with those eyes, and there was no way that he wasn't getting his Christmas present. So we spent the morning of Christmas. We went down. First of all, I got up and I made some blueberry muffins so that we could take them down to the beach and eat them. And it's the first time since we've moved to Brisbane that we've decided to do that. So even though it was an overcast day and not Christmassy at all, it was amazing how packed all of the beaches were at like 7, 8 in the morning. We stopped off to get some takeaway coffees to have with muffins, and I think we must have gone to 4 or 5 beaches before we found one that didn't have a lot of dogs and whatnot because, Buddy sometimes gets frightened of big dogs, but we finally found one and we settled in and took him for a walk. But after all of that, he didn't really want to play in the water. I think it might have been too cold, which I know is strange for me to say because Brisbane is subtropical, but it rained and it was overcast and it was just a coolish Christmas here with torrential rain in the afternoon. And today is a few days after Christmas, and it is still raining, it is still drizzling, it's still overcast. Haven't been in the pool, and we've put a pile of magnesium in it. David went in to give it a bit of a scrub and whatnot, but he said it was really warm and the magnesium was relaxing. But it has been a wet and grey Christmas here in beautiful Brisbane. So I'm hoping by New Year's we'll be able to get in the pool and I'll be able to have a dip in the magnesium. Hoping to tempt Buddy in and have a little bit of a swim with him. Unfortunately, he's had a few seizures today, so he's having a bit of a rest. And but hopefully by New Year's Eve the weather will get better and Buddy will get better and we can all enjoy it. Yeah, so we ended up having the blueberry muffins, and then we had a pork roast for lunch, and I made a mango and passion fruit crumble for dessert, so not a traditional Christmas at all. But Buddy and Millie got some presents. Buddy got a new puzzle to work out, and Millie got a pom-pom ball. And they both got this fancy pants filtered water fountain bowl thing, so they get to share that because that's what they do. Even though we've tried to discourage it, they keep doing it. So we've lent into it and bought them their own fancy pants bowl with all these filters and whatnot. It's a very noisy thing when it starts to run out of water, but anyway. I don't know that they knew it was Christmas. Millie was playing with the baubles on the tree, but it didn't seem like Christmas because we were so looking forward to David's family coming up. You know, it just seemed really weird. It kind of seemed like Christmas, but then it seemed like any other day. I don't know. I hope you guys had a good time. And then, because it was pouring rain, we just sat back like lumps on the couch and we watched Elf, which is always funny, I think. And then we watched Bad Santa, and he is really a bad Santa, really, really bad. And then we watched Scrooged, which is always good, I think. And yeah, by then I think we just rolled into bed and slept. Oh, and David bought me a Minnie Mouse teapot and Mickey and Minnie cups to go with it. So it's super cute, and if you don't know, I collect Disney stuff, so yeah, very cute. And I actually didn't have a Minnie Mouse teapot, so tick that off the list. And I bought David some clothes, so yeah, that was it. Just pretty quiet and pretty laid back, but it would have been so much better with, David's family. But anyway, today's story is about family, and sometimes it starts with Mr. Ripley, who is a bit of an older gentleman, and he was living in Barrel, which is about 90 minutes from Sydney, and it's a beautiful rural area and really popular as a weekender spot. David and I have gone there that many times when we lived in Sydney, and we've got friends that lived there, and you go cruising around all the little quaint shops, and there's little unique house shops and antique stores and old-fashioned pubs and beautiful gourmet food shops, and it's got a kind of a tourist destination now. Back in the 50s when this story takes place, it probably was more rural than fancy pants people going on weekenders, but there's a lot of small farms and hobby farms out there, and it's got a kind of a place where you have a winery or horses and things like that. It's a very nice area. But Mr. Ripley, he wasn't loving it because he was living all alone in his very large house, and his wife had died, and it was just all starting to get a bit too much for him. And he really needed someone to move in and look after him. And he could afford to pay someone because he was really quite wealthy, but even though he was wealthy, he wanted someone he knew. He wanted a relative or a member of his family to feel comfortable in his home. And his first thought was that he would get his sister to move in, but the big problem with that was that she lived in the UK with her husband, and their life was sweet. They were well established and they had their own home, and the sister's husband, Mr. Wakeling, he was a professor at the very prestigious Cambridge University. And not only was the position prestigious, but his salary was good, and being a professor meant that you really had a job for life back then, along with the pension that accompanied it. But Mr. Ripley was really persistent in wanting his sister and her husband to uproot their life in the UK and move to Australia. And he wrote to her often, for 5 years in fact, between 1940 and 1945, trying to persuade her to uproot their life and move to Australia. And he promised her to be worth their while by referring to all the contents of his home as theirs. And even in October 1945, he sent a copy of his will off, and he said that he'd left most of his wealth to the Wakelings, Of course, 1945, World War II was still cracking along and the after effects of it, so it's not really the best of time for the Wakelings to move to the UK. But Mr. Ripley was still persistent, and he promised to provide them with not only accommodation, but also a living and an income while they were caring for him, and the bulk of his estate for their future after he died. So, feeling that they would be looked after and reassured by him that they would be looked after and in the future, the Wakelings decided to make the decision to sell their home. Mr. Wakeling resigned from his position as professor at Cambridge University and gave up his pension and his fixed salary, and they made the long move to Australia in 1947. So back then, it would have been by ship, and they would have had to go through that long journey over the seas. And they settled into the home in Barrel with Mr. Ripley. But sharing accommodation is never easy, and particularly as you get older. And after a year or so, there'd already been a few misunderstandings between the parties. In the end, Mr. Ripley decided that he no longer wanted to leave his fortune to the Wakelings, and what he did was he sold his home and he altered his will, disinheriting them. So selling the home left the Wakelings with nowhere to live, which was promised to them by Mr. Ripley. And no doubt he also stopped providing any income for them to live on. So the Wakelings were left high and dry in Australia with no house and nothing that was promised to them. So they really had no choice but to sue Mr. Ripley and recover damages for breach of this alleged contract. And so when it went to court, the court found in favour of the Wakelings and awarded them £12,000. But Mr. Ripley was not having it and he appealed. And on appeal to the Supreme Court, what the court did was actually consider whether there was actually a contract. So a contract is just something for something. And every day we make contracts when buying a coffee or a book on Amazon. They're not the fancy pants documents that you often may think of. Some are required to be in writing, like things involving the transfer of land. But most people are more experienced with oral contracts, like buying a coffee or a bus ticket or an aspirin at the pharmacy. So in Australia, there are actually 6 different components of a contract that must be present in order to enforce it. The very first thing that must be present is an intention to create a legal relationship, i.e., you intend it to be binding and you intend it to be legally enforceable. Not like a bet between a husband and wife, for instance, and the loser has to wash the dishes. That's usually not enforceable. And the reason for that is that most contracts between family members or husband and wife are presumed in law to be not enforceable. And they're actually called social contracts. Like the husband who moved to India and due to health reasons his wife couldn't come. And he agreed to pay her a monthly allowance, but then he stopped. She sued and the court said there was nothing in the discussions between the couple that they intended it to be legally enforceable. Same with a husband who promised his wife a monthly dress allowance. Then he stopped paying it. There was nothing to enforce it was just a conversation between them. And so, of course, this is not hard and fixed law, but it's a presumption. So presumptions can be rebutted if there's evidence to say that it is actually intended to be an enforceable relationship. So the Wakelings argued that all of those letters sent over the 5 years, that correspondence from Ripley, his assurances that they'd be cared for while looking after him and in the future, and that copy of the will that he sent, these were all evidence that this was not a social contract. That, together with the fact that they'd given up a comfortable and financial lucrative life in the UK to move to Australia, proved to the court how serious they were. They treated this offer from Ripley to move in very serious. They changed their whole life and they moved across the world on the basis that they would have accommodation, a living, and be future provided for. And these factors made the court think that they intended to be legally bound. All of those things meshed together formed this intention. And so the court found that the agreement was binding and they were entitled to the damages. It's a really important case, this one. It's really an important story because it's one where people can rebut this whole thing that it was a social contract just by showing the evidence that the people took it seriously and intended it to be binding. And it also shows how courts look at evidence to show that sort of intention. So it's a really important case for those reasons. I think the court got it right both times, but I'd be interested in knowing what you think. Anyway, that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.